Bonjour. We're in the business of creating people's proudest moments. Never before has there been greater expectations, greater aspirations, greater demands on sport. I get to present to you the big picture. Sport and major sporting events, and particularly mega sporting events, are on the front line. They have a definite date. They amplify all types of messages, but at the same time, they're working in a very challenging environment. They're working in an environment that social media, digital connectivity, consumer activism, and purpose-led corporate strategies are the talk of the town. We are at a point where we're better connected, yet in some ways further apart. We're better informed, yet we see what we want to see. ESG is alive and well, but it is not the substitution and it is not the cure-all. There are global reckonings on social and historical inequality and injustices in every single community around the world. Geopolitics, identity politics are a part of our everyday lives, and conflict surrounds us, big and small, at home and further away. There's conflicting values, and we're talking about our values now more than ever. We're talking about our different philosophies and what is a cultural norm. There's this age-old debate: are we looking after ourselves, or are we looking after everyone? Individualism versus collectivism, or stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. And then finally, we have evolving standards on ethics, integrity, accountability, transparency, and compliance. All of these are the backdrop of major sporting events. Simple, hard to navigate. So, if sport gets a hard time, we can understand why. It's expected to sail these waters in a fail-safe, progressive way. The reality is, who's involved in sport? Is it just a series of pyramids, or is it an organic ecosystem? At the Center for Sport and Human Rights, and you won't be able to read the detail I'm looking now, we created a map of this often used word now on ecosystem. People-centric and institutionally focused. We are all in the stadium together. And the reality is, people play different roles. In the middle, of course, the athletes, but all the roles we play around sport are part of our journey in and through sport. And every actor group, public, private, and third sector, interacts with individuals and each other. We have different roles. We have different responsibilities. And yes, we have, of course, different rights. We have different risks, and we have different opportunities. And every interaction that we take has an impact. But do we really look at the world of sport through this lens, as an ecosystem? That if we have flares burning and racist abuse being screamed from one section, it creates a butterfly effect, ruining the atmosphere for everyone. However, if we create the wave, we create energy around, positive energy around, we have a much better chance at creating a proud moment. Now, how do we bring this to life? Well, first and foremost, we need to prevent harm, remedy issues when they arise, and then we can create opportunities. And we do this by generating awareness, building capacity, creating lasting value. You cannot take advantage of opportunities unless you've respected and protected people, first and foremost. So we have a duty to build knowledge. Knowledge gives us peripheral view on how and what context we're dealing with, and then experience in leadership helps us to give us depth and set horizons. This all backed with the positive culture that we create. If we create good regulations that help us maneuver this, that work together and not just our own regulations, we have the right representation, the right lived experiences, then we have a sense of perspective. That helps us resolve, that helps us to promote with sincerity, and eventually develop and create this often beautiful word we like to use, true legacies. My challenge to everyone here, whatever actor group you play in, is to look at your current structures, to look at your leadership style, to explore the ways that you engage differently, depending on the context, depending on the culture, depending on what respect looks like. I'm anxiously waiting to see what happens in the United States right now. When Roe versus Wade could possibly be overturned, what will we see in terms of the response of sport? Does it not affect us? Do we stay silent? These are the real realities that we are facing in sport. We have a chance to heal and to thrive through sport if we give it a chance, if we look at things differently, and ultimately we structure ourselves in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you. Great keynote. I wonder if we've got any questions from our young sports makers. Lishav is reaching for the microphone. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the message, David. Again, just a quick question. I know that mega events these days are doing a lot towards promoting human rights and promoting peace, especially in the current context. At the same time, I want to know, like, because they turn into a playground for political propaganda, like, how do we differentiate that? How do we stop that? Any advice on that?
It's a great question. Probably not, the answer is probably not as short as the question. You know, I think it is about being very, very honest and being transparent with our intent. Due diligence in the awarding process, where we have our most leverage, is absolutely critical. To be able to put all the questions, all the risks, as well as the ambitions out into the open, to ensure that there's checks and balances, that is the time to do it. Otherwise, we start to pick up the pieces as we move forward. And that is ultimately what we're seeing, is a lot of questions and changing sands at the same time. But there's also philosophical differences. We have to be less lazy and be much more focused through our feasibility assessments of different locations. I mean, I'm a firm believer that every place should have the opportunity to run events. It's just how we run those events and what those events stand for. So I think it's not a simple answer, but it is a fairly simple process. Ask the right questions, conduct good due diligence, and leave nothing on the table. And that's when you award great events.
Thank you.
I actually think we have time for one more question if the young sports makers have got another question for David. Go ahead, Arthur.
Okay, so sir, you are Chief of Innovation for Human Rights and Sport. Now we have seen during the pandemic that sport was really important for all the population in order to move, in order to progress physically, mentally, to fight against mental health issues. What would be the next step to make policymakers understand how sport is now a very important human rights for everyone?
It's a great question.
What would be the main measure to make sport as a real human right?
It's a great question. I think our isolation, as well as our deep appreciation for human interaction and connectivity that we've experienced, has all given us a moment of reflection. I think the question is that our identity, our being and belonging is not just in our mental form. It is in our physical form, it is in our spiritual form, and yes, in our virtual form as well. And in order to really ensure that not only policymakers, but private institutions, everyone is singing from the same page, we have to start taking a more multilateral and multi-stakeholder approach to how we organize. More people with more interest and more experiences need to be around the table. And I think that's the reality. More people need voice, accompanied with agency, to be able to truly express themselves. And that voice and agency, you cannot have true voice without the agency to ensure that there's a safe place to be able to express your views without fear of retaliation or violence. And so I think it's very critical that we create more safe places for courageous conversations and are committed to brave and bold action. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Arthur. And thank you very much, David. Please join me in thanking David for a wonderful keynote speech. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.